At my mother-in-law's 80th birthday party, I stood up in front of 60 guests and gave a toast in perfect Korean. The room went silent. My husband's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. His mother's face turned the color of ash, because for 38 years, they thought I couldn't understand a single word they said. I'm Rebecca. I'm 68 years old now, and I'm going to tell you about the longest con I ever pulled and why I had to. I met James Park in the spring of 1981 at Seattle General Hospital. I was 25, a registered nurse working the night shift in the cardiac unit. He was 29, a pharmaceutical sales rep who came through our floor twice a week. He had this smile that made me forget I'd been on my feet for 10 hours straight. We started with coffee in the hospital cafeteria, moved to real dates, and by Christmas, he'd proposed. I said yes without hesitation. I loved him. I loved how he held doors open, how he called his mother every Sunday, how he talked about building a life together. He was handsome, successful, respectful. What I didn't know then was that respect had conditions. We married in June 1982. I was 26. The wedding was beautiful, traditional American ceremony followed by a Korean reception to honor his mother. Mrs. Park had immigrated from Seoul in 1965, bringing James when he was 13. She spoke English, but preferred Korean, especially at family gatherings. I didn't think much of it. Lots of immigrant families code switch. I figured I'd pick up phrases naturally over time. The first few years were good. James worked his way up to regional sales manager. I kept nursing, pulling double shifts when we needed extra money. In 1985, Mrs. Park came to us with a proposal. She wanted to open a Korean restaurant in the University District. James would manage the business side, she'd run the kitchen, and I would invest $15,000 from my inheritance, my grandmother's entire estate that she'd left me the year before. Family business, James said, holding my hand across our kitchen table. We build this together, Rebecca. You, me, my mother. Someday we'll pass it down to our children. I signed the partnership papers without reading them too carefully. I trusted my husband. The restaurant was called Soul Garden. It opened in March 1986, and within a year, it was packed every weekend. Mrs. Park's kimchi became legendary in Seattle's Korean community. James quit his pharma job to manage it full-time. I kept nursing because someone needed to maintain steady income and health insurance. Here's what I didn't notice, or maybe didn't want to notice. Mrs. Park spoke Korean to James constantly when I was present. In the restaurant, at family dinners, at holiday gatherings. They'd switch to English when addressing me directly, but their real conversations happened in a language I couldn't access. I told myself it was natural, a mother and son sharing their native tongue. I told myself I was being paranoid when I caught them glancing at me mid-conversation, when they'd suddenly stop talking if I walked into a room. The not knowing created this constant anxiety. Was the restaurant doing well? James said yes, but I never saw detailed books. Were we making money? He said we were reinvesting profits. Why couldn't we afford a bigger house when Soul Garden was always full? He said restaurant margins were thin. Every question I asked was answered with just enough information to quiet me, but never enough to satisfy me. You don't understand the restaurant business, Rebecca, he'd say, not unkindly. Let me handle it. I convinced myself this was normal. I was busy with my own career. I made head nurse by 1990, charge nurse by 1995. I worked 60-hour weeks at the hospital while James worked at Soul Garden. We were ships passing in the night, each captaining our own vessel. Except I was navigating with full charts, and he was steering in waters I couldn't see. The children never came. We tried for years, saw specialists, spent thousands on fertility treatments. Each negative test felt like another failure, another way I wasn't good enough. Mrs. Park would pat my hand and say in careful English, "God's plan." But I'd catch her and James talking in Korean afterward, their voices low and serious. I imagined they were disappointed. I imagined they pitied me. I imagined all sorts of things because I couldn't understand their actual words. In 2015, I turned 59. James turned 63. Soul Garden was thriving, according to him, but we still lived in the same modest house we'd bought in 1988. I was planning to retire from nursing at 65, had been contributing the maximum to my 401k for decades. When I asked James about our retirement plan, about what our stake in Soul Garden was worth, he became vague. "The restaurant provides for us," he said. "Don't worry about money." But I did worry. I worried because I'd put $15,000 into that business 30 years ago, never took a salary from it despite being listed as a partner, and had no idea what my investment was worth. I worried because I'd worked my entire adult life and had no clear picture of our combined assets. I worried because I was approaching retirement age and felt like I was walking blind toward my own future. That worry turned into something else one afternoon in early 2017. I was 51, sitting in my kitchen, scrolling through my phone, when I saw an ad for Duolingo. "Learn a new language," it said. On impulse, I downloaded it. On impulse, I selected Korean. I didn't have a master plan. I was just tired of not knowing. Tired of watching conversations happen around me, tired of feeling like a guest in my own family. I told myself I'd learn some basics, enough to understand dinner table talk. I told myself it was a harmless hobby. I started with 15 minutes a day. "Good morning, thank you. How are you?" The Korean alphabet, Hangul, was surprisingly logical once you understood the system. I practiced during my lunch breaks at the hospital. I practiced while James was at the restaurant. Within 3 months, I could read basic signs. Within 6 months, I could understand simple sentences. But Duolingo only takes you so far. In January 2018, I found a Korean tutor on a community college bulletin board. Her name was Susan Kim, a graduate student at University of Washington. We met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill every Tuesday afternoon, my day off. I told James I'd joined a book club. He never asked which books we were reading. Susan was patient. She didn't ask why a 62-year-old white nurse wanted to learn Korean. She just taught me verb conjugations, honorifics, formal versus informal speech. She assigned me Korean dramas to watch, Korean news podcasts to listen to. I absorbed it all like I was studying for the most important exam of my life. The breakthrough came in August 2018. James and his mother were talking in our kitchen while I was supposedly reading in the living room. I had my book open, but I was listening, really listening, and suddenly, I caught a full sentence. "She doesn't need to know about the second account." My blood went cold. I stayed very still, kept my eyes on my book. They continued talking, not knowing I understood. Something about keeping the house in my name and the restaurant value has tripled. I didn't catch everything. My Korean wasn't perfect yet, but I caught enough. That night, I started keeping a notebook. Every conversation I overheard, I wrote down what I understood. My Korean improved rapidly when I had real motivation. Susan noticed my sudden leap in comprehension and congratulated me on my dedication. If she suspected anything, she never said. By the fall of 2019, I was functionally fluent, not perfect, but good enough to understand complex conversations. Good enough to know that my husband and his mother had been discussing Rebecca's retirement money and how to protect it. Good enough to hear Mrs. Park say, "When she retires, we'll have access to everything." I kept my face neutral. I kept pretending. I went to work, came home, made dinner, watched James and his mother speak Korean at our table while I smiled and nodded. Inside, I was screaming. Outside, I was the same Rebecca I'd always been, pleasant, accommodating, unaware. I needed proof. In December 2019, I took a week of vacation and told James I was visiting my college roommate in Portland. Instead, I met with a lawyer named Patricia Chen. I found her through a website for financial abuse victims. She specialized in helping women untangle complex marital assets. "Bring me everything you have," Patricia said in her downtown Seattle office. "Bank statements, tax returns, business documents, anything with your signature." I brought her 3 decades of tax returns that James had always prepared. I brought her the original Soul Garden partnership agreement. I brought her the deed to our house, which I'd never actually looked at closely. Patricia spread it all across her conference table and started connecting dots. "Rebecca," she said after 2 hours, "you're listed as owning 33% of Soul Garden Restaurant LLC. According to the business valuation I pulled from public records, that restaurant is worth approximately $2.4 million. Your share is worth $800,000. I stared at her. "That can't be right." "It is right. And according to these tax returns, the restaurant has been paying dividends to its owners for the past 15 years. Significant dividends. But I don't see any deposits into your personal accounts that would reflect your share. Where's the money going? Patricia showed me. There was an account in James's name only, another account in Mrs. Park's name. Over the past 15 years, my share of the restaurant dividends, nearly $400,000, had been systematically deposited into accounts I didn't have access to. Money that should have been mine had been quietly siphoned away while James told me we couldn't afford to remodel our kitchen. "What about the house?" I asked, my voice shaking. Patricia pulled out the deed. "The house is in James Park's name only. You're not on the title, even though you've been paying half the mortgage for 38 years. I felt like I was falling. "How is that legal?" "It's not legal. It's financial abuse. And with the evidence we have, we can prove it." Over the next 3 months, Patricia and I built a case. We subpoenaed bank records. We documented every conversation I'd overheard and translated. We prepared for what Patricia called the most satisfying confrontation of your legal career. The original plan was to serve James with divorce papers privately. But then came the 15th of February 2020, Mrs. Park's 80th birthday party. James had been planning it for months. He'd rented the private dining room at a fancy restaurant in Bellevue, invited 60 people from the Korean community, business associates, family friends. He'd asked me to give a toast honoring his mother. I sat through the 5-course dinner making small talk with people I'd known for decades. I watched James and Mrs. Park hold court, accepting congratulations and well wishes. I listened to them speaking Korean with guests, occasionally translating bits for me like I was a child who needed simplified explanations. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. I found Mrs. Park and James's sister, Helen, in the hallway outside the ladies' room. They didn't see me approach. They were speaking Korean. "When does Rebecca retire?" Helen asked. "Next year," Mrs. Park said. "She turns 65 in August." And then, Mrs. Park's voice was matter-of-fact. "We'll convince her to invest her $401K in expanding the restaurant. Once it's in the business account, James will restructure the LLC. She'll be bought out at a minimal valuation. She won't understand the paperwork, she never does." Helen laughed. "She's been clueless for almost 40 years. Why would she start paying attention now?" I stepped back around the corner, my heart pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it. This wasn't just about past theft. They were planning to take my retirement, everything I'd worked for my entire adult life. I walked back to the dining room. I caught Patricia's eye where she sat with her husband 3 tables away. We'd invited her as a guest, a precaution I'd insisted on. She gave me a slight nod. Everything was ready. The servers were circulating with champagne for the toast. James stood up, tapped his glass, waited for silence. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate my mother's 80th birthday," he began in English, then switched to Korean for a longer, more eloquent version. The guests applauded. He gestured to me. "My wife Rebecca has a few words to say." I stood up. My hands were steady. I'd practiced this moment in front of Susan for 2 weeks. I picked up my champagne glass and smiled at the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said in perfect Korean. The room went silent. James's smile froze. Mrs. Park's chopsticks clattered onto her plate. I continued in Korean, letting every word land. "I've been married to James for 38 years. For 38 years, I've listened to conversations I wasn't meant to understand. For 38 years, I've been treated like a guest in my own family. Tonight, I want to toast to new beginnings." I switched to English, making sure everyone understood. "I've just learned that my husband and his mother have been stealing from me for 15 years. $400,000 of restaurant dividends that legally belong to me. They've kept the house I helped pay for out of my name, and they were planning to steal my retirement savings next year." Mrs. Park stood up, speaking rapid Korean. "You're lying. You're crazy." "I'm not lying," I said in Korean, "and I have bank records to prove it." James grabbed my arm. "Rebecca, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" I pulled my arm free. "You've been planning to defraud me of my $401K. Your sister and your mother discussed it in the hallway 20 minutes ago. I heard every word." Helen's face went white. James looked at his mother, then back at me. "How long have you—" "3 years," I said. "I've understood every conversation for 3 years." Every insult, every plan, every lie you told me in English that you contradicted in Korean 5 minutes later. I pulled an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. These are divorce papers. You've been served. Patricia Chen, my attorney, is sitting right over there. She has copies of every bank record, every tax return, every piece of evidence we need to prove financial abuse and fraud. The room was chaos. Guests were standing, talking over each other. Mrs. Park was shouting in Korean that I was an ungrateful American who'd never appreciated their family. James was trying to grab the envelope, stammering something about misunderstandings. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd loved for almost 4 decades. You told your mother last month that I was useful but not essential, that I'd served my purpose. I heard you say it. His face crumbled. Rebecca, please, we can talk about this. We're done talking. I've been silent for 38 years. I'm not going to be silent anymore. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high. Patricia followed me, along with 3 guests who'd witnessed everything and would later give depositions. Behind me, I could hear Mrs. Park still shouting, James pleading, the party dissolving into scandal. The divorce took 8 months. Patricia was ruthless. We proved every instance of financial fraud, every hidden account, every dividend that should have been mine. James's lawyer tried to argue that I'd been a willing partner who'd chosen not to be involved in business decisions. Patricia destroyed that argument with my testimony about learning Korean, the overheard conversations, the systematic exclusion from financial information. In October 2020, the settlement was finalized. I got my $800,000 from Soul Garden, plus $400,000 in stolen dividends with interest, plus half the value of the house, plus half of James's retirement accounts. Patricia had also found a clause in our original partnership agreement that entitled me to lost wages since I'd worked at the restaurant in its early years without compensation. Total, $1.6 million. I was 64 years old and suddenly wealthier than I'd ever imagined. I bought a condo in Capitol Hill with a view of the Space Needle. I invested carefully, setting myself up with an income that exceeded my nursing salary. I traveled to Korea, the country whose language I'd learned in secret, and fell in love with it all over again. But the money wasn't the best part. The best part was reclaiming my voice. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping other women recognize signs of financial abuse. I gave talks at community centers about protecting your assets in marriage. I wrote a blog about my experience that went viral. Women from all over the country wrote to me saying, "This happened to me too." I thought I was crazy. Thank you for speaking up. Susan Kim, my Korean tutor, became one of my closest friends. She told me that teaching me Korean was the most meaningful work she'd ever done. You didn't just learn a language, she said. You learned how to hear yourself again. I'm 68 now. It's been 6 years since that birthday party. James tried to contact me a few times in the first year. I blocked his number. Mrs. Park sent me a letter calling me a traitor and a thief. I framed it. Soul Garden closed in 2022. Apparently, word got around the Korean community about what they'd done, and customers stopped coming. I can't say I felt sorry. I think about the woman I was at 26, signing those partnership papers without reading them. I think about all the times I swallowed questions, ignored instincts, made myself smaller to keep the peace. I think about 38 years of not knowing, not understanding, not being allowed to fully participate in my own life. Learning Korean gave me more than language skills. It gave me proof. It gave me power. It gave me the ability to understand what had been hidden from me. But the real transformation happened when I decided to use that knowledge. When I stood up in front of 60 people and spoke my truth in a language they thought would always be their secret. People ask me if I'm angry. I was, for a while. Now I'm just free. Free from a marriage that was built on deception. Free from wondering what conversations meant. Free from shrinking myself to fit into a family that never intended to make room for me. I learned something important. The cage you're in only exists if you can't see the door. For 38 years, I thought I was locked in. I thought I had no choice but to stay, to accept, to trust. But the door was always there. I just needed to learn the language to understand that it wasn't locked at all. I could have left at 26, or 36, or 46. I could have demanded transparency, insisted on financial inclusion, refused to be sidelined in my own marriage. But I didn't have the tools then. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the proof. Now I tell women, get the tools, learn the language, literally or figuratively. Know what you own, know what you're worth, know what conversations are happening around you. Don't wait 38 years like I did. But also, I tell them, it's never too late. I was 64 when I got my life back. 64 when I finally understood what had been done to me and decided to do something about it. Some people thought I was too old to start over. They were wrong. I wake up every morning in my condo, make myself Korean coffee in the French press, and look out at the Seattle skyline. Sometimes I practice Korean with the language exchange group I joined. Sometimes I help another woman understand her rights. Sometimes I just sit quietly and appreciate the sound of my own thoughts, no longer wondering what words I'm missing. I thought I needed James to have a good life. I thought I needed his mother's approval. I thought I needed to belong to their family, to belong anywhere. I was wrong about all of it. The family I belong to now is the one I've chosen. Friends who value honesty, a community that supports survivors, a life built on transparency instead of secrets. I'm fluent in more than Korean now. I'm fluent in knowing my worth. I'm fluent in recognizing manipulation. I'm fluent in the language of self-respect. And when I meet women who are where I was, living in marriages where they don't understand the full picture, where they're told not to worry about finances, where conversations happen in languages or codes they can't access, I tell them my story, not to scare them, but to show them that understanding is power, that it's never too late to learn, that the door is there, you just have to see it. I lost 38 years, but I gained wisdom that I can share. I gained freedom that I cherish every single day. I gained the knowledge that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. Would I do it differently if I could go back? Of course. I'd learn Korean in 1982. I'd read those partnership papers carefully. I'd demand to be on the house deed. I'd insist on seeing the restaurant books. I'd ask harder questions and accept fewer vague answers. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward with the knowledge we have now. All we can do is refuse to spend one more day in silence, one more year not understanding, one more decade making ourselves small. I'm Rebecca. I'm 68 years old. And for the first time in my adult life, I understand every conversation I'm part of, because I'm only having conversations where I'm respected as an equal participant. That took me almost 40 years to achieve, but I achieved it. And if I can do it at 64, anyone can do it at any age. The door is always there. You just have to learn to see it. And then you have to be brave enough to walk through.